Okay, so we're ready to start, and today is November 16th, 2019. So we'll start with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. Sorry for the delay getting started. Okay, so in the last class, I went quickly through the first part of Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Fours, number 10, and I realized that I went too quickly through it because we just had a few minutes and I thought I could finish the sutta in a few minutes. But then I realized that we should go through it at a more leisurely, stately pace, especially since the topic is somewhat important, since, as I mentioned last time, the topic are the four bonds. And these are, the Pali word is the same as the popular pastime in Middle American suburbia these days, yoga. But the original sense of yoga, at least one of the meanings, is to bind. And so, even in English, we have the word yoke. The yoke is what's used to join two horses or two bulls, two oxen in doing work. And so it's one of the meanings of the word yoga is a bond, that which, or even a yoke. It's used in ordinary discourse in Pali or in ancient Indian languages to mean the yoke that joins the two bulls that are used to pull the plow. And then another meaning of yoga, which is not applicable here, is exertion or effort. So often when the Buddha is giving an admonition, an exhortation, he says, yogo karaniyo, which means yoga should be done. And that doesn't mean that bondage should be done, but rather an effort, an exertion should be made. Okay, so here the text speaks about four yogas, four bonds. Yeah, here you can see in the Pali text, it uses the word yoga in the plural. Okay, so the four bonds are the bond of sensuality, the bond of existence, the bond of use, and the bond of ignorance. And if you're familiar with other groups, classes of defilements, you'll see that four of these four, three of them correspond to another familiar set that we come across again and again in the Buddha's discourses. What is that set of three that we find partly exemplified here? Exactly. Well, the Pali word is the general term for that group. Exactly. It's the three asavas. And in fact, in later texts, starting maybe with the Abhidharma period and continuing on, the texts add an asava of views. And so the content of the four bonds and of the four asavas in that fuller presentation is exactly the same. In fact, even I believe in the Dhammasangani, which is the first book of the Abhidhamma Pitaka, we have 4 asavas. Anyway, yeah. So this is the Dhammasangani on, so what are the Dhammas, the things that are asavas? There are 4 asavas. So the asava of sensuality, the asava of existence, the asava of views, the asava of ignorance. So we have 4 asavas. And then I believe, no, it doesn't go into the yogas. But anyway, you could see the content is exactly the same. The 4 bonds and the 4 asavas. Okay, so this is called the Udesa. It's sort of like the initial presentation, the concise presentation. Now comes the elaboration, where the text will define each of these terms. So what is the bond of sensuality? And what's interesting here, and I didn't point this out last time, but we look at it. For someone does not understand as they really are the origin and the passing away, the gratification, the danger, and the escape in regard to sensual pleasures. Now, we have this key expression, not understanding. And so when it says, the text says that somebody doesn't understand something, so what particular mental factor is implied by not understanding? Exactly. It's avijja, ignorance. And so even though ignorance will later be elaborated as a separate bond, but we could see that ignorance is already implicit in the bond of sensuality and underlies the bond of sensuality. And then what, in this case, what doesn't one understand? And so it's 5 terms are mentioned: origin and passing away, and then gratification, danger, and escape. And in the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses, in numerous places, these 5 are broken up into 2 separate groups. And in some suttas, they're elaborated separately. So for example, in regard to the 5 aggregates, so it might say somebody doesn't, in one sutta, someone doesn't understand as they really are the origin and the passing away of material form, feeling, perception, volitional activities, consciousness. And then the next sutta might say, here somebody doesn't understand as they really are the gratification, danger, and escape in regard to the 5 aggregates. But here, those 2 groups, and then in the 3rd sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, after going through the 2 groups separately, then they might be joined in the 3rd sutta. Somebody doesn't understand the origin, passing away, gratification, danger, and escape in regard to the five aggregates. And then here we could see that they're joined together. And though they're joined together, but the two have somewhat sort of different, or they're highlighting somewhat different things. So first, origin and passing away is highlighting what particular aspect of the Dhamma? Exactly, impermanence. And so this is one sort of, you could say it deals with one particular doctrinal principle, the principle of impermanence, that everything conditioned arises, it has an origin, and it passes away. And then this becomes the domain of insight knowledge. The initial insight knowledge is the knowledge of udaya bhaya jnana, the knowledge of arising and falling away, origination and vanishing. Okay, then the next set of three terms constitutes, I call this a kind of progressive development of understanding or insight. And so first, one looks to see, why does bondage take place? And so why bondage takes place is because of, here it's translated gratification, but the Pali word is asada. I think the Sanskrit might be. But I'm not so sure about this. So don't copy. don't copy. But the original sense of this is like a sweet taste. Do you remember how the Chinese translators translated this? Wei, simply wei, the flavor, a delicious flavor. So I think the word was originally used in regard to food, delicious food that has a delectable flavor. And then when the text raised the question, what is the gratification, let us say, in regard to material form, or any of the five aggregates? So what is this gratification? It says sukha somanassa. So this is, sukha is the pleasure, and somanassa is the joy. The pleasure and joy that arise dependent on whatever it is. Let me just represent this. So the joy, the pleasure and joy that arise dependent on X. And X can be anything. And so the commentaries often say that gratification is indicative, or is pointing to, the second noble truth. That is the noble truth of the cause or origin of suffering. In other words, craving. But actually, the way I say it, that this is a somewhat indirect way of pointing to craving. But what it's pointing to directly, gratification, is the stimulus for the arising of craving, the objective ground, objective basis for the arising of craving. That objective basis is that things give pleasure, joy, and delight. Pleasure and joy. And so this is the way sort of we look at things superficially. Sort of the mind is always looking out for pleasure and joy. For example, I come over here and I sit down, and the first thing I'm looking for is this orange flask. I'm not only secondarily concerned is the computer set up, is the recorder set up, but the first thing the eye goes to is the orange flask. Why? Because it has a nice tea, a morning tea. So even though the purpose of a gathering is to teach and learn the Dhamma, but this teacher's mind isn't so much focused primarily on teaching the Dhamma, but on getting the flask of tea. Okay, so that, and why does he look for the flask of tea? Because Sandy makes it very delicious with right amount of milk and the right amount of sugar, not too sweet, not completely bitter tea. So that's the gratification, looking for the pleasure and joy that comes from tea. Okay, then the danger. So that's sort of the first step in this sequence is enjoyment or gratification. And the second step is translated as the danger, adinava. It's related, I think it's based on the verbal root deen, which has the sense of like dejection, a misery, and even you could say the wretchedness, disadvantage, drawback, pitfall. So I followed, I think, Venerable Nyanamoli in using danger. And so when the texts speak about the danger in these objects of enjoyment, then the danger is said to be the fact that everything that's enjoyable is anicca, dukkha, viparinama dhamma. So this is usually translated impermanent, suffering, and subject to change. So impermanent for anicca is quite satisfactory, but things are dukkha, not so much that they're actually suffering, but you could say that they're unsatisfactory, inadequate, or you could say that they're flawed, defective, unable to provide complete, lasting satisfaction. So I drink the tea, I finish the tea, and then the effect of that, when I get the enjoyment from drinking the tea, is that maybe some future occasion I come and the flask of tea isn't here. And I'm looking around and then I'm worried, anxious, and disappointed. No tea. So then comes disappointment. And like everything that's a source of enjoyment fails to give that stable, lasting, permanent satisfaction. So that is the dukkha aspect, the unsatisfactory aspect. Then viparinama, it's often translated change, and I don't want to dispute with that, but the V, the prefix, gives a particular nuance to it. It's not simply objective change, like the way the seasons change from summer to autumn to winter to spring, or the way we change the clocks. It's not simply the fact that everything changes, but the prefix V gives a nuance of deterioration, So it's change in the sense of decline, deterioration, decay, though decay is a bit strong, but things fall apart. They start to deteriorate. Like we human beings, we're born, we go through childhood, then we reach the teenage years, then we are at the peak of our strength and vigor, maybe in the early 20s. Then from 25 on, it's a process of viparinama. So when you're going from infancy up to 25, maybe it's not yet viparinama, but from 25 on, then it's viparinama. Any 26-year-olds here? No? Anybody in your late 20s? No? Anybody below 40? Okay. Do you agree that is there's viparinama from about 25, 30 on? Hopefully, yeah. Okay, so this is the Adinava. And so this is a sort of deeper stage of understanding. So when you recognize the Adinava, then you see through the asada. So you see that beneath that pleasant, enjoyable surface of things, there's this underlying drawback, disadvantage, danger. And so this is said in the commentarial way of explanation to represent the truth of dukkha, suffering. And then the third aspect is the escape in regard to whatever one is examining. And that escape is said to be the removal and abandoning of desire and attachment. So the escape is nisarana, which is actually related to the word meaning refuge, the word refuge, but it's in a somewhat different sense. Refuge is sarana, so that is like we go for refuge to the Buddha. So it's based on the verb sarati, which means to run towards. And this is, with the prefix ni, is running out. So it's the exit, the escape, the deliverance from the situation. And that is said to be the removal and abandoning of chanda raga, and you could say desire and attachment. And then the commentaries identify this with the third noble truth. Of course, the third noble truth says, what is the cessation of dukkha, of suffering? It's the extinction of craving. But then to reach the extinction or the abandoning of desire and attachment, one needs a course of practice. So that is the Noble Eightfold Path. So we might even say that the escape includes the third and fourth noble truths. Okay, so those are the 5 things that should be understood as they really are to gain the goal of the Dhamma, to gain liberation. Okay, but what happens when there's avidya, ignorance, in control of the mind? Then one doesn't understand these things as they are. And then, in regard to sensual pleasures, then sensual lust, sensual desire, sensual affection, infatuation, thirst, passion, attachment, and craving continue to lie, to dwell deep within the mind in regard to sensual pleasures. And it is that sensual lust, sensual delight, and so on that becomes the bond of sensuality. We could say the bond of sensual desire, the desire for sensual pleasures. Okay, so that is the first bond. Then the second bond is called the bond of existence, but actually the real bond, as we will see from the definition, is not existence itself objectively, but it is the desire or craving for existence. So we can see this in the definition. So how is there the bond of existence? Okay, so somebody, again, the avijja or ignorance, doesn't understand origin, passing away, gratification, danger, and escape in regard to states of existence. And it's interesting, the text uses a plural form, bhavanang. And then the commentary says that this is the desire and lust, desire and attachment towards existence in the form and formless realms. But I think that's maybe being too technical and too specific. Because even the desire, say, for somebody has a desire for rebirth to go on existing either under good conditions in the human realm or in the heavenly realms, it's still the bond of existence. And maybe even beings that don't have an idea of other realms of existence, but still that attachment to go on existing would be the bond of existence. Even flies, mosquitoes, squirrels, birds, fish, all want to go on existing. So if they find their life threatened in any way, then they squirm and try to escape because they're attached to existence. But I think specifically, like within the context of the Buddha's teaching, it's generally understood in the case of human beings to be that desire to take a new existence in some kind of desirable, under desirable conditions, or in a blissful realm. Okay, so one doesn't understand the origin and passing away of all of these realms of existence, the gratification, danger, and escape in regard to them. And then there is that lust for existence, delight in existence, and so on, thirst for existence, craving for existence that continues to lie deep within in regard to existence. So that is the bond of existence. Okay, then we come to the bond of views. So someone doesn't understand as they really are the origin, passing away, the gratification and danger and escape in the case of views. And maybe nowadays we don't think so much of different views as being a kind of bondage. But in ancient India, well, actually this does continue through the centuries in various forms in many different cultures. But in ancient India, in the Buddha's time, the different ascetic communities, well, the Brahmins and the different communities of samanas, ascetics, paribhajikas, wanderers, ajivakas, were all sort of their practices all focused around particular views about the nature of the soul or the self, views about the nature of the world, And the Buddha regarded these views as objects of attachment. And so he speaks about this lust for views, delight in views, and so on, this attachment to views, craving for views as a kind of bondage. And we even think like, in Europe, was it the wars were fought between the Roman Catholics and the Protestants over different interpretations. In the Buddha's time, between the different ascetic communities, their differences and views were expressed in the form of debates. And then once literacy became prominent in India, then the way the conflicts of views would be manifested would be each party would write a treatise expressing the views of that particular school of thought, and then their opponents would write a refutation, and then there would be the debates either in person on the stage, so to speak, or in written documents. Even I have to say within the Buddhist community, we have the division into 18 different schools of early Buddhism, then later different schools of Mahayana Buddhism. So the Theravadins, they have their treatise called Kathavatu, the book of discussions or debates arguing against the positions of the Savastivadins, Dharmaguptakas, Pugalavadins, and so on. Then later, the Madhyamakas write against the Yogacarans against the Madhyamakas. So we have this endless debate of views going on. In Europe, they did this a bit more violently, resorting to war. Well, we have before those wars, the Inquisition and killing of people, execution of people who hold heretical views, and then the wars, the religious wars. Okay, so we could see the danger in views, and this way views is a basis of bondage. And then comes the bond of ignorance. And here, ignorance doesn't lead, it's not said here explicitly to lead on to some other kind of craving, but ignorance itself is the bondage. So here somebody doesn't understand the origin and passing away, gratification, danger, and escape in regard to the 6 bases for contact. So this is extremely important point, an interesting point. What are the 6 bases for contact? Yeah, go on. Yeah. And the mind, yeah. So these are the 6 bases, called bases, because these are the bases on which consciousness arises. So these are sometimes called the 6 internal bases. And they have their corresponding external bases, the corresponding objects. And when the object impinges on the internal base, then that impingement, when the mind or consciousness meets the object through that base, that is called contact. And then it's from that contact that there arises feeling, perception, volitional activities, and all of the other events within the process of cognition. So everything really originates, the whole field of, 6-fold field of experience, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, other internal mental activity, all originates through these 6 bases. And so for the Buddha to dispel when there's the cloud of ignorance envelops these six bases, then there comes you could say, the delusions of permanence, the delusion of some kind of stable pleasure, and the delusion of self, of I and mine. And so the way to break up and dispel those delusions is by observing these six bases for contact, seeing the arising and passing away of eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, and then understanding that gratification, the way we obtain pleasure and enjoyment through these six bases, the danger in them, that they're impermanent and grounds for suffering, and the escape from them, removing the attachment and clinging to them. Okay, so when one doesn't understand these things as they are, then ignorance and unknowing is just another word for ignorance. This is avidya, and I think it's unyana, lie deep within in regard to the six sense bases. So that is the bond of ignorance. So those are the four bonds. And then the Buddha continues and he says, one who is fettered by bad, unwholesome states that are defiling, conducive to renewed existence, troublesome, ripening and suffering, leading to future birth, old age, and death, is said to be not secure from bondage or not free from bondage. And then interesting that the word or the expression used here is said to be a-yoga kami. So the basis of this is the expression yoga kama. Yeah, so kama is security, and yoga is, of course, the bonds, the bondage. And then this is negated in this passage, so I translated not secure from bondage. And not secure from bondage, but is one who has not attained yoga kama. And elsewhere, yoga kama is used as a synonym for nibbana. So it was implied as this person is one who has not attained nibbana because they're in the grip of these four bonds. Okay, then comes the positive counterpart to the four bonds. And this is Visang Yoga. Yeah, and the prefix V implies here separation. So the sung is just an intensifier. So it's a little bit like we have raga is attachment or lust, and then viraga is the absence of lust, the removal of lust. And so yoga or sang-yoga is bondage, and visang-yoga is removal of the bondage, severance of the bondage. And so we have the severance of the four bonds. And just first taking the severance of the bond of sensuality, here somebody understands as they really are these five aspects of sensual pleasures, origin and passing away and so forth. Okay, and so when somebody understands this implies the presence of what? Yeah, exactly. It's the presence of panya, of wisdom. In fact, Yeah, in fact, the text uses the verb pajanati. And the problem with our English language is that one understands is a good rendering for pajanati, but it's from this verb that we get the noun panya. But if we translate panya as understanding, it implies like just a very simple conceptual understanding, like a school child can understand maybe how a computer works, or can understand the law of gravity. But this is a higher kind of understanding, so we render panya as wisdom. But the verb that's used, pajanati, is the verb that's the basis for the noun panya. So here somebody has that panya, that wisdom that sees. So it's not just a conceptual understanding, but it's a direct seeing, direct penetration, penetrating insight into origin, passing away, gratification, danger, and escape. And with that insight, then sensual lust, sensual craving, and so on, do not lie within in regard to sensual pleasures. So that is the cutting off of the bond of sensuality. So actually this panya, sort of in the technical terms of the four stages, we could say that even a stream enterer is one who has gained that insight into origin and passing away, gratification, danger, and escape. So the stream enterer, the person at the first stage of realization, has that understanding, that wisdom, but has not yet carried that wisdom through to its completion. But as one develops that wisdom, then gradually, in stages, that sensual craving gets diminished until it's cut off completely. And so that is achieved in the case of sensual craving with the attainment of the stage of non-returner. So we could say that the non-returner is one who has cut off the bond of sensuality. Then there's the severance of the bond of existence. Again, the same principle applies. But the one who is, even in the case of the non-returner, there's still a subtle clinging to existence, so that the non-returner is not yet completely emancipated. But it's at the final stage, the stage of arahatship, that the craving for existence is cut off. The bond of existence is permanently cut off. Then comes the bond of views, So this bond is already cut off at the stage of stream entry. And then the bond of ignorance is cut off at the stage of arhatship. And so the text here is really speaking about the one who has cut off all four bonds. So it's speaking about the arahat. And so the arahat is one who is detached from these bad, unwholesome states, and therefore is said to be secure from bondage. So that's the severance from the four bonds. Okay, the verses are nice, particularly in the original Pali, but basically they just recapitulate in verse what we already went through in prose. So if there's any questions on last week or last 2 weeks ago, I went through this in about 5 minutes. Now we took 40 minutes, 45 minutes to go through. Okay, any questions? Yes, Mano? And you could take the wireless microphone.
Thank you, Bhante. Could you explain again what you mentioned at the start about whether there are 3 asavas or 4 asavas? I didn't get the...
Yeah, in the suttas there are 3 asavas are mentioned. 3 taints or outflows, sensuality, existence, and ignorance. Then, I think starting in the Abhidhamma and then continuing through, the 4th asava is added, the asava of views. Yeah, basically that's all I said.
Thank you, Bhante.
Hi, good morning. I'm wondering if you, if they both are in fact equal, the metaphor of the flood and the metaphor of bondage, if there's one you find to be more useful or that comes up more in the discourses, in terms of speaking about these 4.
Between the asavas and the views?
Like the metaphor of a flood.
Oh, I see.
And the metaphor of bondage.
Yeah.
You know, if there's one that you find comes up more, if there's one that you find more useful in understanding these
certainly things. The term asava, or the concept of the asava, occurs much more frequently within the suttas. You mentioned also the floods. That's another term that's used in the suttas, and then it's defined in the Abhidhamma exactly in the same way as the 4 bonds. So there's the flood, or it's enumerated in the same way. The flood of sensuality, the flood of existence, the flood of views, and the flood of ignorance. I don't think we could say on objective grounds that one is more useful than the others. It's just that there are 3 different metaphorical terms that are ways of characterizing these defilements, and maybe the text uses these 3 different terms because they resonate differently with different people. The word asava was actually being used before the time of the Buddha. It was not the term original to the Buddha. It was used certainly by the Jains, though in a somewhat different sense. And so the Buddha picked up that term out of the contemporary spiritual field and absorbed it into his own teaching, and then uses it when the Buddha is explaining the process that culminates in liberation. It's almost always done in the suttas by way of the asavas. The bonds and the floods as a group of 4 occur very infrequently. But the idea of a flood occurs poetically fairly regularly, in that, particularly in verses, that probably because this is based very much on the living experience of people in India during that, well, even up to the present day, and maybe even more so in the present day when the natural cycle of the monsoon is being exacerbated by changing climate. Yeah, actually, we saw this past, was it August or September? Yeah, August, I think, in Kerala, Karnataka, and parts of Maharashtra, where the floodwaters just wiped out whole villages and towns. Yeah, so this would be a common part of the experience of that time during the monsoon season, rising rivers, flooding, and even sweeping away villages. Yeah, so anyway, so it would just be dependent on one's personal inclination, which particular metaphor one finds more useful. Yes, Mark?
Good morning, Bhante.
Good morning.
I just want to be clear. You said that there were the three asanas,
Yeah.
not four, and the view came, voila. Sorry, the bondage of viewpoint came much later.
No, what I said is that in the suttas, 3 asavas are typically enumerated. And then it's in the text of a somewhat later period, the Abhidhamma and later texts, that the asava of views is added. But we find in the suttas, even in the suttas, 4 bonds, as we do here. And then in some places, 4 floods are mentioned. And the content of the bonds and floods are the same 4 things. And then when you add the 4th asava, then you get the content of bonds, floods, and asavas become the same.
Thank you. So the Karavatu, was that ever rescinded? As,
Katavatu,
yeah.
the book of debates.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's a translation of it. What is the translation? Points of controversy, that's it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then there's a summary, or at least highlights from, because the Katavatu is quite a thick volume, but there's a summary of it, and Venerable Jnanatiloka Thera has a book called, what's it called, The Guide to the Abhidhamma Pitaka. And then he has a chapter on that which summarizes. And they're very abstruse arguments from one school to the other. Okay, any further questions? Okay, then let us move on. And I'm going to move a bit quickly through suttas which deal with somewhat familiar material, at least for those who have been coming regularly to this class. Okay, we're going to come to a string of suttas that deal with somewhat with right effort and mindfulness or mind training. So here we have a sutta on really dealing with the training of the mind to eliminate unwholesome thoughts. And what divides this, let's call the base of this sutta into 4, is simply the mention of the 4 postures. But the principle here, and this is for a monk who's intensively engaged in mind training, is to abandon and dispel any of the 3 kinds of unwholesome thoughts that arise. So there's the kama vitaka, that's the sensual thought of sensual pleasure. And of course, usually, one has to say frankly, for a monastic who's training, they're not thinking about flasks of tea when sensual thoughts arise or lovely music, but it's usually sexual fantasies and imagination. A thought of ill will, common especially when communities are living together and people have different ways of doing things. And so ill will can arise between one, I don't know whether this, I guess it occurs with nuns also, but maybe more so amongst, you nod your head. But it's particularly problematic amongst monks, because monks maybe tend to be more tenacious in holding to their views about how things should be seen, should be done, and so forth. And then when they break up into different factions, then ill will arise of one to another. And then the other, and this is interesting, is the thought of harming. Because usually we speak about the three unwholesome roots: greed, hatred, and delusion. And so we could see sensual thought connected with greed, and the thought of ill will connected with hatred. But then the thought of harming doesn't fit neatly into that threefold scheme of greed, hate, and delusion, but it seems to be another manifestation of hatred. So it seems, my opinion, the Buddha would have maybe included that. Maybe that's just a speculation, because the virtue of non-harming was strongly emphasized by the chief rival of the Buddhists in Northeast India. And who is the chief rival of the Buddhists in that region? Exactly, still, I can't say thriving today, but still present today. And so for the Jains, their statement is ahimsa paramo dharma. Non-harming is the supreme dharma. And so if you've ever seen Jain ascetics or pictures of them, they wear a mask over the mouth, a cloth over, or a filter over the mouth, so that they won't unintentionally breathe in any minute creatures. And when they walk, they carry a little broom so they could sweep the ground in front of them to sweep away any kind of insects so that they don't step on any. The Buddhists didn't carry the principle of non-harming to that extent, but the Buddha also put a great emphasis on non-harming. And so that was, I think, part of sort of the shared emphasis in the Shramana communities, the non-Brahminic communities, is non-harming. Yeah, in fact, there are famous verses that constitute, they call it the Ovada Patimokkha. So it's the monastic code of exhortation rather than formulated rules. Kanti paramang tapo titika. So patience is the supreme austerity. Nibbanang paramang vedanti Buddha. Nibbana is supreme, the Buddhas say. I should know it by memory, but it slips my memory. Anyway, so these are the three kinds of unwholesome thoughts. And so the advice for a monk in training is not to tolerate it, but to abandon those thoughts as soon as they arise. And so if a monk does tolerate those thoughts and doesn't dispel them and so forth, then he's said to be devoid of ardor and moral dread, to be lazy and lacking in energy while walking. I have to say, this makes me feel a little scared. And so that applies, here it's stated first while walking, then while standing, while sitting, while lying down. So those are the four fixed postures, positions of the body. And so in all four postures, one has to be diligent in eliminating any of those unwholesome thoughts that arise. And what's interesting is the mention of lying down, because sometimes what happens is that when one is engaged diligently in the practice of meditation, when sitting, when doing the walking meditation, when standing, say, at the end of the walkway, when doing the walking meditation, one is very diligent in dispelling those unwholesome thoughts. But then comes the time to lie down, to go to sleep, and so one thinks, now I can put down my vigorous meditation object, and then one lies down, and then the unwholesome thoughts come flooding in. So if the mind is disposed to sensuality, then the sensual thoughts will arise when lying down. If there's been some simmering resentment or hostility towards somebody, even if it's a group meditation, you don't even know the person, but you don't like the way they walk, you're trying to walk very slowly and they're walking fast, and you're thinking, why are they walking so fast? They should be walking slowly. Or you like to walk fast and they're walking slowly, and you think, they must be really advanced in their practice and I'm walking fast because I'm not so advanced. Who do they think they are, being better than I am? So then those thoughts of resentment come up, or ill will. And then maybe you even think, let me give that guy a little poke with my elbow and see how mindful he'll be. And that's the thought of harming comes up. Okay, so those, yeah, so that is the way the thoughts come up when lying down. Okay, then comes the positive side, and this is really the advice that the Buddha is giving for the diligent meditator. When those thoughts of sensual thoughts, ill will, thoughts of harming arise, one does not tolerate it, but abandons it, dispels it. Very strong verbs he used. Terminates it, obliterates it. Then one is said to be ardent and to dread wrongdoing. But the Pali words actually have more sort of fixed or determinate textual meanings. Let's take the positive side. Yeah, so atapi, the word here translated as ardent, we have this in the Satipatthana Sutta, the refrain of the Satipatthana Sutta, dwells contemplating the body and the body. Atapi, that's ardent. Atapi sampajano satima, ardent, clearly comprehending and mindful. And then otapi is related, it's based on the noun otappa, which is, here it's translated moral dread. That is, one fears, it's explained as the fear of the consequences of unwholesome actions. So one sees danger in those unwholesome thoughts. And then one is aradha viryo, one who has aroused energy, vigor. Okay, so then the text itself is followed by the verses. What's interesting is that the sutta speaks about how the monk cannot reach the highest enlightenment and how the monk can reach the highest enlightenment. I think it's sambodhim uttamang. Yes, sambodhim, which is enlightenment, and uttamang is supreme or highest. We'll take a group of these suttas. Let's see the time. Yeah, this is another one which, again, is divided into four by way of the four postures. So first, the text says that the monk should be possessed or observant of sila, of virtuous behavior, and so forth, training in the training rules. So when you've accomplished this, then what further should you do? And then comes the training of the mind. But this is expressed not as abandoning the three kinds of unwholesome thoughts, but as abandoning, here is given, longing and ill will, dullness and drowsiness, restlessness and remorse, and doubt. So these are the 5 hindrances. And so the significance here is that one abandons the 5 hindrances, and then the mindfulness becomes established without any kind of muddleness. The body becomes tranquil, undisturbed, and the mind is concentrated and one-pointed. And then the description is the same as in the previous sutta. One is ardent, dreads wrongdoing, energetic and resolute while walking, standing, sitting, and lying down. Actually, the verses are very nice, but we'll just skip over them. Okay, then comes the 4 right strivings. So this is a stock formula that we've come across numerous times in the past. So the 4 right efforts, the effort to prevent the arising of unarisen, unwholesome states of mind, the effort to abandon arisen, unwholesome states, the effort to arouse unarisen, wholesome states, and the effort to stabilize and maintain, increase, expand, and fulfill the arisen, wholesome states. Again, the verses are very nice, but you could read them at your leisure. And then come an interesting way of explaining the 4 right strivings. So what we see in this sutta, this is sort of the stock expression on right effort that we come across again and again, particularly when the Buddha is explaining right effort in the Noble Eightfold Path. But then we have 4 kinds of right striving. And these are a kind of elaboration of the 4 right efforts. So, striving by restraint, striving by abandonment, striving by development, and the 4th is called striving by protection or by maintenance, by maintaining. So what is striving by restraint? And then this is defined by the standard formula for the restraint of the senses. We've explained this at length previously. So when one sees a form, hears a sound, smells an odor, tastes a flavor, and so forth, one does not grasp upon its general marks and its specific features. since if one does so, then the unwholesome states of attachment and dejection might arise and take over the mind. And so, in order to avoid that, one restrains each of the sense faculties. Okay, so that is striving by restraint. One applies the effort to restraining the sense faculties. Okay, then comes striving by abandonment. So this is the abandoning of arisen unwholesome states. And this is explained, just as in the previous sutta, as not tolerating the arisen sensual thought, thought of ill will, thought of harming, or any other unwholesome thoughts that arise, but abandoning them, dispelling them, terminating them. And striving by development. So here, the text uses the formula for developing the 7 factors of enlightenment: mindfulness, discrimination, or discernment of phenomena, energy, rapture, tranquility, concentration, equanimity. So one brings into being those 7 enlightenment factors, starting with mindfulness, culminating in equanimity. And then the interesting one is striving by protection or by maintenance, and that is that one maintains and guards an arisen, excellent object of concentration. Let's just see the note here. Yeah, actually the word is samadhi nimittang, but if you know the Visuddhimagga and the commentarial explanation of the word nimitta, I don't think that's necessarily entailed here. In the Visuddhimagga and the commentaries, the word nimitta is a kind of visualized image that appears when the concentration becomes strong. But here it might be, well, actually it could be intended here. Of course, the word is used, or the expression is the sanya. And what's interesting is that it explains this maintaining the excellent object of concentration, a little bit strange, but in terms exclusively of the different stages of decay of a corpse. Though actually one would begin, I think, with the bloated corpse, then go to the vishad in reverse order. The fishid corpse, the festering corpse, the livid corpse, the worm-infested corpse, and then the skeleton. And it's rather difficult to obtain these objects nowadays, except the skeleton. So a number of, especially meditation monasteries in Sri Lanka, there'll be a special little room in the monastery where they keep a skeleton, which they usually obtain from the hospital. And so if a monk wants to practice the skeleton meditation, they'll go to that room and then get the perception of the skeleton. And then once they get the inner perception, then they can go and practice in their own quarters. It's a little puzzling why, as an excellent object of concentration, it could have mentioned the mindfulness of the breathing, or the kasina objects, or the brahmavihara objects. Perhaps this is the work of the compilers of the canon, who are maybe devoted to the practice of the decay of the corpse. Okay, maybe, yeah, we could pause here and then take any questions on these suttas in different ways, dealing with aspects of right effort, right application of energy. Any questions? Okay, if there's no question, yeah, okay, good. And take the wireless microphone.
Bhante, it's not so much a question, an observation.
Yeah,
When you were speaking about the tea,
yeah,
like I was just listening and hearing about the tea.
Yeah.
And like 10 minutes later or so, I caught the orange color on the side of the computer. And all of a sudden this craving was arising. And I thought, ooh, how nice if Sandy could make me that tea. And just how subtle, like I caught it right away, but
Yeah.
how sneaky these things are. And it was not there when you were discussing it the whole time. And then just catching it with an eye, like how,
Sometimes a visual stimulus
Yeah.
is necessary. Let me just say, since there's no questions, I think the next sutta is a bit strange. Yeah, this is a strange one, so we could just go through it quickly. Actually, it seems that the purpose of the sutta is just really to praise the Buddha. So it says that there are these 4, I think it's agapanyati, proclamations, or declarations of things that are foremost, that are supreme. So the foremost of those with bodies is Rahu. Rahu is said to be the lord of the asuras. The asuras are the titans, the anti-gods. Well, some could translate as demons, but they're not like devils, like Satan. We did? Okay. So Rahu is the asura chief who abducts the sun and moon. So I think that was the ancient Indian interpretation of an eclipse. So what happens when an eclipse occurs is that Rahu is this asura who steals temporarily the moon or the sun. And so he's supposed to have an enormously sized body. The foremost of those who enjoy sensual pleasures is King Mandata. This was, even from the Buddha's period of time, supposedly an ancient king going back maybe millennia before the Buddha, who was reputed to have enjoyed the most luxurious sensual pleasures. The foremost of those who exercise authority is Mara, probably because Mara Adipateya, because Mara is the lord of the world, so to speak, over all unenlightened sentient beings. Mara has control of them, so he is the foremost of those who exercise authority. But then in this world, with its devas, Mara, Brahma, and so forth, the foremost is the Tathagata, the Arahat, the perfectly enlightened one. So those are the 4 who are foremost. Okay, so we will stop here and then pick up next week with sutta number 16. And then we can come back, let's see, at 12:15. We have short question and answer session. So if you think of new questions, you can ask them. And then we'll have the afternoon will be 3 hours of meditation from 20 to 1 until 3:50, alternating periods of walking and sitting meditation. Okay, so let us end with the sharing of the merits. So I think you all have the verses in front of you. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasata chabumata Deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang Sabbe bhuta anumodantu. Sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacham hehi. Sampadang punya sampadang. Sabbe sata anumodantu. Sabba sampati siddhya. Bhavagopadaya vichihetato. Etantare satakayupapanna. Rupya rupicha. Asanya sanino. Dukha pamuchantu. Pusantu nibuting. Okay, so we could end with 3 half bows to the Buddha.